When molten metal freezes, it forms a crystal structure just like water does. The structure has boundaries between crystals and vacancies like little empty negative spaces. These boundaries and vacancies are what allow metal to be bent, compressed, and stretched without breaking. And just like a snowball that gets harder as you pack the water crystals tighter, as you work with metal, it gets stiffer, springier, and more difficult to manipulate as the vacancies get closed up and the boundaries get forced tighter together. The metal at its most open is referred to as dead soft. At this stage, it is very easy to bend and make a change. As you work with it more, it gets more springy and is referred to as half-hard. At this stage, it takes more effort to make a permanent change. And when it's at its most closed, it's called full hard. You can see here that it's very, very springy at this stage and hard to make a permanent change. Eventually, the crystal structure gets so tight that it can't move further without breaking apart, so when it's forced to, it snaps. If you've ever bent a paperclip back and forth until it snapped, you've experienced this metal fatigue. Even just flexing the metal repeatedly can cause this and is often the root cause of industrial or transportation disasters. Luckily, it's easy to avoid this in jewelry work. Annealing is a heat treating process that expands the crystal structure, reopening the boundaries and vacancies, and restoring the metal's flexibility. This process is done in the fireproof area in our main studio. You'll need an annealing pan, quenching bath, flux, copper tongs, good ventilation, and a torch. Start by turning on the ventilation, pickle pot, main gas supply valves, and the valves for the torch that you'll be using. If using a gas air torch, light the gas and adjust it so you have a large brushy yellow flame. Add compressed air until the flame turns blue for most of its length but retains a brushy yellow at the tip. This will give the flame more heat and more directability. Our goal in heating is to bring the whole piece of metal up to its annealing point at the same time, quickly and evenly. So even though the big flame may be intimidating, it's important to have a flame that can cover the whole piece. When we're heating, the flame needs to be straight up and down. This will be easier to do if you shift your grip so that your hand is under the torch. Hold it like a pencil. That'll bring your elbow down against your body and your arm won't go to sleep while you're holding the torch. Angle the torch so that the column of flame is straight up and down, and bring the torch down so that the brushy yellow part of the flame is covering the metal. Move the flame around your piece as you heat it to keep the heat even, and watch for the visual cues that tell you when your metal is at its annealing point. Copper will oxidize almost as soon as you start heating it. As you continue, the oxides will shift and change as you move the torch, and the air is able to get to the surface. Darker and darker, and then it starts changing colors more dynamically. Eventually the metal gets so hot that the oxides burn away while the torch is on the metal and rush back in as soon as you move it. That's your cue that you've reached the annealing point. Take the torch away and immediately pick up your metal with the copper tongs. Drop it into the quenching pan to cool it. Try to drop it in flat and all at once, like a belly flop. Turn off the compressed air and then the gas. As soon as your copper hits the water, its temperature drops to that of the water. Fish it out and put it in the pickle pot to clean it. The oxides on the metal are too well bonded to scrub off. The pickle dissolves most of the oxides and loosens up the others so that they can be scrubbed off with a brass brush and soap. If the pickle is hot, this will only take 2 to 3 minutes. If cold, it'll take more like 10. Only use copper tongs to take things in and out of the pickle. The copper oxides that dissolve from the surface of your metal build up in the solution, and they have a magnetic charge. Steel has the opposite charge, so if you put it in the pickle, the dissolved copper is attracted to your metal and steel tool and coats them with copper. Make sure you put your brush and tongs back into the jar behind the sink. If you're done with the torch, shut off the valves under the counter and the main valves by the door to the smithy. The heating process for annealing yellow brass is almost the same as it is for copper. However, because brass resists oxidation, the visual cue is different. Brass still does the thing where it's clean, where the flame is on it, and immediately oxidizes when you move the flame away, but it's far more subtle, more like a shadow. In this close-up clip, you can see that shadow skim over the surface. Most beginners find it difficult to anneal brass without under or overheating it. A solution for this is to coat the sheet with flux and heat it until the flux matures or melts into a glassy film. Always start by stirring the flux and thinning it to the consistency of heavy cream. Apply a coat of good rich flux to the entire surface. Always close the jar when you're finished and rinse out your brush. As you heat your metal, your flux will go through several stages. First, the liquid water will evaporate. The flux will bubble up and then settle down, and it'll look like it's been coated in powdered sugar. As you continue to heat, the solids in the flux will begin to melt, and at first they'll look like a dirty sludge. And as you keep heating, they'll thin and go glassy. This glassy stage is referred to as being mature. Your yellow brass is annealed when the flux matures. Brass can be quenched, but it will usually be softer if allowed to air cool. Instead of dropping it into the quenching pan, set it toward the back of the stainless steel counter where it can cool without somebody accidentally touching it. Aluminum can be annealed, but its melting point is significantly lower than copper or brass, so you have to take care not to melt it. An easy way to do this is to smear the surface with soap and heat it until the soap burns to a brownish black. The burnt soap can usually just be rubbed away underwater. Aluminum does not require pickling. Some metals need more heat than can be provided by a gas air torch and should be annealed using the acetylene torch instead. To bring the metal up to temperature quickly, switch to a large number 4 tip to get the best coverage, and brick in your piece to help it retain its heat.
Can you see the oxidation? Can you see it starting to glow?
Steel is heated until it glows a dull orange, then buried in the pumice to cool slowly. If quenched or cooled too quickly, steel will actually get harder and more brittle. Titanium cannot be annealed in our shop. Even the acetylene torch is not hot enough to get it to its annealing point, and it forms tough but colorful oxides that can't be easily pickled off. It can also ignite if you did manage to get it hot enough, and it's impossible to extinguish a titanium fire without special equipment. Fortunately, titanium work hardens extremely slowly, and you are unlikely to need to anneal it anyway.